Thank you, Annika. One of the questions, Annika mentioned the review that had been undertaken at the behest of Congress that was completed in November, and there is some sign of new energy and commitment on the part of the administration and Congress. But there's also, of course, the question of intervention fatigue and how to engage the American government and public in undertaking action in as remote a place as the LRA operates, particularly at a time when we're 10 years into conflict in Afghanistan and Iraq. Marcus Bleasdale is one of the world's leading documentary photographers, and he's devoted 10 years plus himself to working on the Congo. He's the author of the book Rape of the Congo and has done published work in virtually every major American and European publication. I think that his view is that you engage through making people see the individuals affected on the ground. And so for the next part of this, we've asked Marcus to present the work that he did with the Pulitzer Center and Human Rights Watch over the course of last summer and fall, gathering evidence of what the LRA had done across Uganda, Central Africa, and northeastern Congo. So Marcus Bleasdale.
If I can partner with organizations like Human Rights Watch to maybe enhance their message, change their message, and allow people to see more effectively the message that they have to portray. But increasingly in our media world, with cutting budgets and shrinking page numbers, it's increasingly more important for us as journalists to maintain funding. And the partnership that we did together with the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting and Human Rights Watch in this particular situation was invaluable to allow us to travel to some of the remotest regions of the world, to spend several months documenting one particular topic. Name me one magazine or newspaper that will give us 4 months and the funding to document over 4 months a situation such as the Lord's Resistance Army. So thank you very much, both the Pulitzer Center and Human Rights Watch, for allowing that to happen. What I'd like to do is briefly take you through some of the small experiences. What the LRA like to do quite regularly is to send messages not just to the local villages where their abductees come from, but also to the local military. So they actually cut off with machete her lips and her ears and sent her back into the town as a message to the local military that the LRA were close by. This is not an isolated event. This happens regularly. This has happened in northern Congo. This has happened in southern Sudan. This has happened in Congo, where this lady comes from. And it's unfortunate that it's an increasing atrocity that the Lord's Resistance Army are utilizing. This young man spent many months in the Lord's Resistance Army. He was forced to be a soldier. He was forced to kill. He was forced to carry. He was forced to be an agriculturalist and nurture crops for the Lord's Resistance Army. And so what they're trying to do is to build a small village every time they come to abduct, every time they take young children, every time they take older adults. It's to maybe feed their need for cultivation, feed their need for soldiers, and unfortunately feed their need for sexual violence, because a lot of the times they're abducting young girls and forcing them to be wives. This young boy, I don't think I've met someone as courageous as him ever in my life. His name is Olivier. He was 14 when he was abducted, and he spent many months as a fighter in the LRA. He can't remember how many people, how many children he killed, how many adults he was forced to hit over the head with a blunt wooden instrument. And he became, unfortunately, the mentee of one of the commanders, and he was taken under the wing of one of the commanders and taught specially how to kill and given very specific orders and responsibilities in those massacres. As a result, thankfully, over many months, he was given, his role became a little bit more autonomous, and he was given some private guard duty, which allowed him one night to escape. When he escaped, he fled for several days through the bush on his own and found a local military group who he then led back into the area where the Lord's Resistance Army was hidden and spearheaded an attack on the Lord's Resistance Army's position, allowing the freeing of many more children. He's now back home with his parents, but he still talks about his nightmares. He still talks about his aggression. He still talks about his impatience and his sometimes overwhelming need to kill. And this child is 16. He's in an area of the world that we can't get any help to because it's too insecure. There's no NGOs that are capable of working in that zone. And so this is the problem that we're facing constantly, is that a lot of these children are returning back to their homes, lucky enough to escape, but unlucky enough not to receive any help or assistance from the international community in terms of psychosocial development and psychosocial help. This young lady, we mentioned earlier on that some other women are forced to be sex slaves. She was forced to be the wife for 2 years of one of the commanders. This lady also spent 18 months being constantly raped by one of the most senior commanders of the LRA. Just to show you a little bit of the way they're working, this young man only spent 3 months with the LRA, and we might actually kind of breathe a sigh of relief, but he, as a result of the fact that he was only there for 3 months, but he was forced to walk for over 12 hours a day with over 90 kilos of grain, of rice, of basically things that the LRA had pillaged from different villages in the attacks. And he spent months and months walking through the bush and lost 40 kilos when he was doing that. He was nearly dead when he escaped. And luckily enough now he's back with his family. Another part of these attacks that we don't see very often or think of very often is what's left behind by the LRA. This lady wasn't taken by the LRA, but she was pregnant. She was 9 months pregnant when her husband was taken by the LRA. She was 9 months pregnant when she heard that her husband had been killed by the LRA. And now she's still back at home with her daughter, but forced into prostitution because she cannot support her family and her young child because she doesn't have a breadwinner in the home. This lady was abducted by the LRA and spent nearly 2 years in captivity, and also was made pregnant by one of the commanders. She gave birth in the bush and was lucky enough to escape. She took her child with her. She escaped with her child and is now at home being reintegrated into her village, and has been, through lots of help of the local chiefs, has integrated also her child into the local community. There have been some comments by the local community that this child should have been left to die in the bush. It was the child of one of the LRA commanders, but she refused to allow that to happen, and she's been very active in trying to increase the understanding of the village that this child is her child, this child should be loved, and this child should be welcomed back into the village. Again, this young lady escaped. Actually, we heard Annika talking about the 2008 Garamba Park bombings. This girl took her child, who was just a few months old when the Garamba Park bombings happened, and she was actually in Garamba Park when those bombs fell. She talks about the bombs falling just several meters away from her, 70 meters, 60 meters away from where she was based, and she took her child under her arm and ran into the bush. She talks of bodies flying either side of her, people's legs being shot off and by the shrapnel, and she managed to escape with her child and is now back home again. This girl, along with Olivier, probably some of the most courageous people I've met. Her name is Valentine. She was abducted when she was 13 years old and was raped by Joseph Kony himself. She was his wife. She was forced to be his wife at the age of 13. And she lived in one of the small villages where Joseph Kony used to come. All of these commanders have several villages or camps that they come to, so they don't just have one wife, but they have several wives in each of these camps, and Valentine was one of those. She was also a cook. She used to cook for Joseph Kony, and one evening she burnt his rice, and she was accused by the other wives of trying to poison Joseph Kony, of being a witch. And the following day she was going to be tried by Joseph Kony and most probably sentenced to death and killed by the other soldiers within the LRA. And so during an attack on a local village, she took that opportunity to escape into the bush. She stripped herself naked, she ran into the bush and hid, and over 2 days, whilst the LRA was searching for her in the bush, she hid, and completely naked, completely silently, no water, no food for those 2 days. She led there completely scared, out of her wits about whether this was going to be the end of her life. Fortunately, 2 days later, the LRA gave up searching for her. She came out and found a young boy, a 2-year-old boy, who was left in the village, and whose mother had been abducted by the LRA, and the child had been left to fend for himself at 2 years old in the village. She picked the child up and walked several kilometers into the bush, through the bush and out to the other side to a small village where she found help. And it's these sort of stories that we get our strength from. It's these sort of stories that we try to pass on to you. They're endless. I mean, this young boy, he spent 2 years in the LRA. He can't remember how many people he's killed. This young girl was raped continuously for 2 years. This girl not only was one of the wives of the commanders, but also was a pretty fierce fighter and was forced to kill many, many children. This boy talks of his nightmares. He talks of his inability to sleep and his inability to deal with his other friends of the same age, and how he has this impatience, how he feels that he has this aggression and he just wants to deal with it immediately. This is symptomatic of post-traumatic stress and symptomatic of the need for psychosocial help that these children simply can't get. What I'd like to do, I can go through so many of these stories. I'd like to show you this picture because this is the head of a fisherman from Niangara, from the same place that we saw the lady with the lips cut off right at the start, the same town where those brutal attacks took place. And this is what the children do. They're forced to hit the back of the heads of the people that they're killing constantly with these heavy wooden instruments. And it's young children that line up a long, heavy hit. The next one lines up a long, heavy hit. The next one comes and lines up a long, heavy hit. And if they don't hit hard enough, then they too will be killed. So they know they have to hit hard. But this young man was lucky enough to survive. And here we have, several months later, he's still alive. And although he can't work because he can't bring together his thoughts so well, he knows that if it was an adult that had been raining down those blows, that he wouldn't be alive today. One thing I'd like to show you really quickly before we finish is we were talking about psychosocial help and how the children simply can't get it. But what they do sometimes have access to is the local witch doctors. The locals try their best to help these children through the horrors, the nightmares that they have, and sometimes using local animist beliefs that they try to draw out the spirits of the Coney atrocities. And these are just a few slides from one of those ceremonies where they pay the spirits. They draw in the spirits into the enclave that they're working in. The spirits come and attack the witch doctors. They draw the spirits out of the heads of the young boys that have been forced to fight and kill. The smoke is a smoke that's used from kind of special leaves and herbs, and that's supposed to draw the spirits out of the brains of the possessed children. They lead them into the trees, and this smoke kind of gets taken in. And when I spoke to these boys afterwards, they really believe that this helps. They really believe that there was some sort of parting of a spirit from inside their mind. Now, I don't believe in any of this, but I know that any sort of help for these children is help enough. And a lot of the times we feel that all they need to do is to, at 14 and 15, learn how to play again and learn how to laugh again. And it's that sort of help that I think that is needed over there more than anything.